La 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 la. La 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 la. That little melody just played in your head, did it not? You heard those tiny blue voices singing, and suddenly you are 6 years old again, sitting way too close to the television on a Saturday morning. The Smurfs was not just a cartoon. It was a cultural takeover that dominated the 1980s like nothing else in animation history. But here is what nobody talks about. This show that brought joy to millions of children eventually became a creative nightmare that exhausted everyone involved. And the reasons behind its decline reveal some dark truths about what happens when corporate greed gets its hands on something magical. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. I am talking about a Belgian artist who watched his beloved creation get twisted beyond recognition. I am talking about network executives who demanded more characters and more episodes until the whole thing collapsed under its own weight. I am talking about a show that won Emmy Awards and then slowly suffocated because the people in charge cared more about selling lunchboxes than telling good stories. So in this video, I am going to take you through the complete story of the Smurfs, how a tiny comic strip from Belgium became the biggest animated phenomenon of the decade, how Hanna-Barbera turned those little blue creatures into a merchandising empire worth billions, and how the relentless push for more content destroyed everything that made the show special in the first place. Trust me, this story gets heartbreaking. The origins let us go back way before the cartoon ever existed. In 1958, a Belgian comic artist named Pierre Culliford, who went by the name Peyo, created these small blue creatures for a comic called Johan and Peewit. They were originally just side characters, little forest dwellers who helped the main heroes on their quest. But readers went absolutely crazy for them. Peyo recognized he had something special and gave the Smurfs their own comic series. And here's what made his original vision so brilliant. Each Smurf had one defining characteristic expressed through their name. Brainy Smurf was intellectual. Grumpy Smurf was irritable. Lazy Smurf was, well, you get it. This simple concept allowed readers to instantly understand each character while also creating natural comedy through their interactions. The Smurfs became massive in Europe throughout the 1960s and 1970s, but American audiences had no idea they existed. That changed when Fred Silverman, the president of NBC, saw Smurf merchandise during a trip to Europe. He immediately recognized the potential and contacted Hanna-Barbera to develop an animated series for American television. Now here's where the story gets complicated. Peyo was protective of his creation. He had spent over 2 decades developing these characters and their world. He had specific ideas about how they should behave and what kinds of stories were appropriate. But he was about to hand his life work over to an American studio that operated on completely different principles. The explosion. The Smurfs premiered on NBC on September 12, 1981, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The show dominated Saturday morning ratings like nothing before it. Within weeks, it was the #1 children's program in America. Within months, it had completely transformed the landscape of animated television. The numbers were staggering. The show regularly pulled in over 40% of the viewing audience in its time slot. NBC expanded it from a half hour to a full hour and then to 90 minutes. By 1983, The Smurfs was airing for an unprecedented 2 hours every Saturday morning. No animated show had ever commanded that kind of real estate on a major network. And the merchandising? Oh, the merchandising. Smurf products generated over $750 million in retail sales in 1982 alone. There were Smurf toys, and Smurf clothes, and Smurf lunchboxes, and Smurf bed sheets, and Smurf breakfast cereals. You cannot walk through a store without seeing those little blue faces staring back at you. The Smurfs were everywhere, and everyone was making money, except the question was whether anyone was still making good television. The creative tension here is what most fans never knew. Behind the scenes, Peyo was growing increasingly frustrated with what Hanna-Barbera was doing to his characters. The American writers did not understand the subtle European humor that made the original comic special. They were turning his thoughtful satirical creation into generic slapstick entertainment. Peyo would receive scripts and storyboards from California, and sometimes he could not believe what he was reading. The stories were becoming formulaic. Gargamel tries to catch the Smurfs. Gargamel fails. The Smurfs celebrate. Repeat forever. The nuance and social commentary that existed in his comics was being stripped away in favor of simple plots that could be easily translated and quickly produced. But here is the thing. Peo was thousands of miles away in Belgium. He could make suggestions and voice complaints, but ultimately Hanna-Barbera controlled the production, and Hanna-Barbera was under pressure from NBC to deliver more episodes faster. Quality was becoming secondary to quantity. The studio was producing over 40 episodes per season. That is an insane amount of content for any animated series. The writers were burning out. The animators were cutting corners, and the stories were becoming increasingly repetitive because there simply was not enough time to develop fresh ideas. The decline by the mid-1980s cracks were starting to show. The ratings were still strong, but the critical response was souring. Parents who had initially appreciated the gentle humor were noticing that the show had become lazy. Episodes blurred together. Characters who once had distinct personalities were becoming interchangeable. And then came the additions. When a show starts adding new characters to boost interest, that is usually a sign that the creative team has run out of ideas for the existing ones. The Smurfs went absolutely crazy with this. They introduced Baby Smurf in 1982, then Puppy in 1984, then Grandpa Smurf and the Smurflings in 1985, then Nanny Smurf in 1987. Each edition was designed to create new merchandising opportunities and attract new viewers. But each edition also diluted what made the original cast special. With over 100 Smurf characters eventually appearing on the show, there was no way to give any of them meaningful development. The village that once felt like a community became an overcrowded mess of blue faces that even dedicated viewers could not keep track of. The show also started taking bizarre creative swings, time travel episodes, episodes set in outer space, crossovers with other properties. These were all signs of a creative team desperately searching for something, anything to make the show feel fresh again. But you cannot recapture magic by adding gimmicks. You recapture magic by returning to what made the original special: the exhaustion. By 1989, everyone involved was exhausted. The show had been running for 9 seasons. That is 256 episodes of Smurfs content. The writers had told every story they could think of multiple times over. The voice actors were going through the motions. The animators were producing work that looked noticeably cheaper than the early seasons. NBC finally pulled the plug, and the Smurfs ended its original run. There was no grand finale, no emotional conclusion. The show just stopped because everyone had finally admitted there was nothing left to give. Peo himself passed away in 1992, and many who knew him said he had complicated feelings about what the American cartoon had done to his creation. Here is the tragedy. The Smurfs could have been a tightly crafted series that ran for 3 or 4 seasons of genuine quality. Instead, it became a content factory that prioritized quantity over everything else. The network wanted more episodes. The licensors wanted more characters to put on products. And somewhere in all that wanting, the actual soul of the show got lost: the legacy. The Smurfs has been revived multiple times since then. There was a new animated series in 2021. There were theatrical films in 2011 and 2013. The characters continue to appear on merchandise around the world. The property remains valuable because the core concept that Peo created is genuinely brilliant. But nothing has ever matched those first 2 seasons of the original show, when the animation was fluid, and the stories were fresh, and there was genuine love being poured into every episode. That magic existed because people still cared about getting it right. Once caring was replaced by calculating, the magic evaporated. The story of the Smurfs is a warning about what happens when creative properties become corporate assets. The show did not fail because audiences stopped watching. It failed because the people making it stopped being allowed to do their best work. Deadlines trumped quality, merchandising trumped storytelling, and a show that began with genuine heart ended as a hollow machine cranking out content until everyone involved was too tired to continue. If you remember racing to the television to watch those little blue creatures, then you experience something special. You caught the Smurfs when it still had magic, before the system ground that magic in the dust. If this video made you remember Saturday mornings spent in front of the TV, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want more stories about the shows that shaped our childhoods and what really happened behind the scenes. Share this with anyone who ever sang that la 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 song, because they deserve to know the truth. I will catch you in the next one.